recording, directing the Sustainable Little Tokyo initiative, which I'm happy to share more about. And a large part of my role is organizing artists. And then I'm also, of course, an artist as well. So photographer, performance artist. So Sustainable Little Tokyo, for folks who aren't familiar, is a community initiative. You see in the top left bubble, right? It was largely a community vision for what the neighborhood wanted built on public land. So it was connected to a community campaign around control of public land and for equitable development in our neighborhood. And we did a number of projects, a lot of it arts and cultural, that were really meant to build community, bring people together, to really advocate for that longer term vision, but also just have a lot of fun, because having fun is the best way for people to get to know a neighborhood and learn to love and care and fight for it. So I had been doing that work for the last 5.5 years or so, and then actually have just transitioned into a new role with the Dirkby Foundation. So I'm really happy. I'm continuing to do organizing work in Little Tokyo, but really happy to share from a lot of that experience with Sustainable Little Tokyo. And then just to pull out of all of that work experience, I can share my superpowers. I was told superpower. I was like, oh, that's cute. Okay, so obviously, around arts and culture. I mean, I'm sure you all have obviously experience, or you're partnering, or you are an arts organization. But obviously really thinking about how to embed art into building social and political power, and really embedding arts-based strategies throughout all of the planning, from the beginning through the end, including, creative things that can happen and arts-based sort of activities as part of community engagement. I'm working with artists as an artist and an administrator. I know sometimes it's kind of like herding kittens. Even I'm kind of like, so really happy to share about my experience really like organizing an artist committee that had been and still is active actually to this day. They were all just volunteers from the neighborhood, about how we brought them together, how we really got this active group to then be really leading efforts in this initiative. And also really here as support for the artists that you're working with. Hopefully there's some artists here today, the arts organizations. I know, being on that side of the work, there's often, not too much time for artists to get to know each other, or to ask for support. So really here to support the artists as well. And thinking through, in addition, thinking through like program design. So I touched on engagement a little bit, but our work partnered with a community coalition, Little Tokyo Community Council. So, thinking about creative community engagement, access and inclusion. I'm also happy I've done trainings on facilitation if your staff just need a little bit of guidance or support in running discussions or community engagement. And then, of course, right, a lot of these are working with the government. I have a lot of experience working with Department of Cultural Affairs, who may be here. Hello. And yeah, just those kinds of cross-sector partnerships, which leads me to the very last thing, which are partnerships. Last year, I led a funny workshop on lasting partnerships, romances, one might say. So I could share. Sustainable Little Tokyo is a cross-sector partnership between an arts organization, a community coalition, and a community developer. And so I can share a lot about what it was like working together in very different fields, creating, clear decision-making processes, agreements. We called it a document of cooperations, and how they can be romantic. I called Sustainable Little Tokyo a nonprofit throuple. Yes. So that's it for me. I mean, please, type in the chat. Happy to be here. Happy to help.
Thank you, Scott. It looks like a lot of fun. So I have a question for you. One is, you're in my hometown. That's not a question. That's just for real. So I'm wondering, when you're not organizing, one that you've not organized or been a part of. What's your favorite event in LA or social space?
Oh my God. Oh, that's hard. Well, okay. This is kind of a cheat because well, no, this isn't a cheat. I'm not, I mean, everything in Little Tokyo is very connected. Everyone knows each other, but I would say one of my favorite events are our Obon festivals. They're a Japanese Buddhist festival that's sort of, I think the equivalent would be like Dia de los Muertos. So it's celebrating your ancestors.
Yes.
And yeah, they're big festival carnivals with food and then it circle dancing where all the aunties come out and teach dancing. So yeah, that's definitely a favorite.
I love
Thank you.
it. Thank you. All right, so I just go. This is me. I'm Michaele Pride. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I think, these are my kind of mottos is just stay curious, be always learning and having fun. I teach architecture at the University of New Mexico, where I also co-direct our Design and Planning Assistance Center. My work in community engagement and creative placemaking began maybe in 1992, so 30 years, working with artists in Los Angeles to think about how their collection of houses, workshops, and shared spaces work together creatively to create a strong identity and sense of place. Community-driven and engaged design and planning have been my passion and practice for 30 years, and creative placemaking I see as both a process and a goal of that work. I co-founded a volunteer community design center in Los Angeles in 1992 after the Rodney King riots, and where I had also practiced architecture in LA for 15 years before joining academia for community design full-time in 1996 as director of the Downtown Design Center at the University of Kentucky. I left there to go to the University of Cincinnati, where I met Margie Waller, the marvelous Margie Waller in Cincinnati, where I was the director of the School of Architecture and Interior Design and taught in that community design and urban design studio, and then left Cincinnati to come to UNM, where I now co-direct the Design and Planning Assistance Center, also known as DPAC. I'm trained in architecture and urban design, but over time I've tried to cultivate these other skills as they suit my interest in serving community interests, in particular low resource and minoritized communities. So as a community designer, a facilitator, that's I see as my role. I'm an accidental academic, but I try my best to learn stuff so that I can teach stuff and bring that also to my students and to the communities with whom we work. And I love that I'm a parent of a talented and alive adult. Then I think the next slide, the qualities that I try to bring to this work and to my life are laughter, listening, this constant curiosity. And I think a lot of friends and family try to help me practice saying no, but I think I usually still say, sure, why not? Okay, so then in my work, I think I worked with Margie Waller just before I left Cincinnati to do a Paint the Street project, which was fabulous with Arts Wave there in Cincinnati. I was part of an NEA Our Town grant back in 2014. And I think that's the next slide, Melissa. Maybe? Yes. Where one of the highlights of this Stories of Route 66 project was a scattered site weekend kind of block party called ID Live for the International District. And we can talk about that. You'll see just one element of the sidewalk chalkboard painting on the right. And then these sharing shelves, I've worked with a colleague here to reinterpret community needs into a built thing that we now bring to community events like Cyclovia and other events. And it's part Little Free Pantry, part Little Free Library, solar powered USB charging station, chalkboard, et cetera, et cetera. I've brought tactical urbanism to my classes in Cincinnati and New Mexico. And yeah, including work with projects for public spaces in Albuquerque at the Civic Center, Civic Plaza. Next, please. So in the end, I'd love to help you with that intersection between design and community health. I can help you with partnering with in different sectors and agencies and facilitating that partnership and with community engagement. And I'd love to learn from you about all of these as well. I look forward to learning together. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm really curious because I just drove through Albuquerque on my way here to Minneapolis. What do you recommend? Like, what is your favorite thing about New Mexico?
Did I have to just say one thing?
Or, however many you want, knowing that.
Well, I love the landscape, the mountains, the Southwest. It feels like home. And it offers so many opportunities to be outside in nature, hiking, skiing, biking, other stuff. So much sunlight, we get lots of energy, and probably the altitude makes it a little heady, and might be why I fell in love with it or thought it was so magical and mystical. But I would be not doing my job if I didn't mention the chili, red chili and green chili. It's green chili season right now. I think just about the harvesting will begin. You'll start smelling roasting green chilies everywhere. And that's a pretty fabulous time of year.
Oh my goodness, my mouth just started to water when you said that. So, thank you for that. Now let me just take a quick swallow before I get started.
I'll send me your address, and I'll send you some, let's see, some green chili.
Absolutely, done. Hey y'all, my name is Mark Valdez, and so nice to be here with you all. I use he, him pronouns, and I am presently in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the land of the Ojibwe and Dakota. And so nice to be with you. These are a picture of kind of a small town where I grew up, small town in West Texas, up in the Panhandle, just south of Amarillo. And it's very much that Texas town. Like the small town football was a big part of cultural life there. The water tower that you see there, kind of taken from that same football game. These are my folks. They were migrant farm workers who came to the U.S. And spent up until my early kind of childhood years working the fields across the country. And you can move on to the next slide. So that's just a little bit about me and kind of my upbringing in my kind of life as an artist and work that I do that kind of brought me here. I'm really curious about the role of art in kind of igniting civic imagination, and increasingly very aware that the challenges facing our communities are just big, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And without a leap of imagination, I don't know how we can solve them. And so a lot of my work and the art making that I do and have done is really increasingly geared towards creating space to imagine beautiful futures. So here's an image of a play that I co-created called The Most Beautiful Home Maybe. We partnered with Scott and the Little Tokyo Civil Committee and the Japanese American Community Culture Center, among others, that toured the United States. But really, some of the questions we asked is how can art influence housing, and in this kind of provocative question that I would ask people is, do housing solutions require a policy shift or a culture shift? And how are we using art in achieving some of these goals? And so that is sort of one example of the work that we've done. This particular one about housing and really art-based problem solving. If you can move on to the next slide, please. Part of that work, I realized that presenting art, making art, using art is just a part of it, and that folks also just need more hands-on practical work. And so we've created a series of workshops, and just as an example of the kinds of workshops that we created around this housing piece, we did create a session around creative facilitation for advocates. We did an art-based a primer around imagination, story, and policy, and how we can use story and imagination in policy conversations. We did this piece around finance, around housing finance, and making something that is really complex and so opaque and maybe a little boring, a little bit more interesting. And we kind of took an imagination and understanding, an art-based understanding of how we talk about financing. And then another one around data and poetry and how we take the numbers and make them human. And so what we found in a lot of the advocacy spaces we were in, there was a lot of data and there's a lot of information, and there's often a gap between information and people's lived personal realities, the human realities. And a lot of this is about really trying to bridge these gaps, that these statistics represent people, and part of that, it's kind of crazy to say, but that imagination space really includes that imaginative leap to go from numbers to people, and how we use art to kind of bridge some of those things. If you could go on to the next slide, please. And then, I've done a lot of work around evaluation and assessment, and an example of that is here at Mixed Blood. I was an artist in residence a few years ago. Mixed Blood is on a neighborhood that in our block where our theater company is, there's 5,000 residents on this one block. 95% are African immigrants and their children and families, and mostly East African, mostly Somali. And one of the things that the theater company realized is that the community here has zero interest in theater. So for a theater company that shares this block, how can we be useful and serve our neighbors and be kind of good neighbors? And so we created this good neighbor framework. And really, we just thought about our work of like, what does it mean as an arts organization, as a theater organization, to be a good neighbor? And created a series of just points and questions to ask that can be used by our neighbors, by the people in our community, but also by the company. So that's the kind of tools that I've kind of created. I also created for Opera America a civic practice evaluation guide that is part how to engage communities, but also how to evaluate the work after the fact. So those are some of the things that I've done in my work and in my practice, and very much a practicing artist, and very much take an art-based approach. So I'll pause right there, and I can't wait to meet all of you all, and if I can be of any service, let me know. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I see why they placed you right before me, and there's a lot of overlap, I think, in the kinds of ways we approach things. But before I begin, I wanted to ask you about where you are now. What's your favorite thing about that place?
I just moved. So I just bought a house on Monday. I just closed up my house on Monday.
Congratulations.
I'm from Texas, grew up in Texas, lived in Los Angeles, but I'm now a resident of Minnesota, where I'm running a theater company here in town called Mixed Theater. And so I'm getting to know the communities, but right now what I love is the Mississippi River is this majestic, beautiful body of water that just flows. And there's something about the flowing water that just moves, that just feels restorative. I run kind of along the Mississippi River every day, and it's become my favorite thing to do here. So come
I love
visit.
it. Yeah, that's great. So I'll just go ahead. So I'm Susannah Laramee Kidd, and I'm an evaluator and researcher, and I work on the impact of the arts, especially in place-based interventions. I have a PhD in the anthropology of religion, literature, and gender, which is not necessarily directly relevant to some of the work that I do now, but it means that I love being embedded in projects and doing field work. So like I'm in this first picture here, I'm embedded in a project doing community engagement in South Los Angeles County. So that's sort of my happy place as a researcher, is that more on the ground kind of thing. Not as much behind my computer, though that happens a lot too. And I am based in Philadelphia, which is part of Lenape-Hoking, or the land of the Lenape people. And I was born and raised here, and I think a lot about how it has changed over time, especially in the time that I was away and didn't live here. Yeah, I also think how much of that change is still the after effects of racist policies like redlining. So this is actually a 1937 redlining map, which actually I have on the wall behind me in my office as well, of Philadelphia. So it's something that I think about and I keep very present with me. And but also how I try to stay more connected to the land wherever I am living is through urban foraging for fruit that I turn into preserves. So when I was living in LA, I convinced a lot of my colleagues to give me their excess citrus and turned it into marmalade. So that's something I figure out what's nearby. And this is an image of very tiny crab apples that I've made marmalade out of. So that's sort of me in the sort of nutshell, and you can move to the next slide. So I got into doing this work specifically around applied research and evaluation for place-based arts and culture strategies in LA, working for the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, evaluating the impact of public art and engagement programming at parks and libraries in South Los Angeles County. So this is an image of Woodcrest Library, where we did, some artists did a sort of design workshops around creating a canopy in that space that is pictured there. So that was really sort of where I cut my teeth on this, but it was a great project to get to do all kinds of evaluation work and also to collaborate with artists. So I still actually do a lot of collaboration with artists in LA. And so that's sort of a key part of my practice is of how do you create, evaluation or data collection kinds of techniques that fit with artistic engagement approaches or engagement approaches in general. So that is a key part of my work. I also, so after that, I started consulting, and I first did that with Metros Arts Consulting, which is based here in Pennsylvania. And I also now do consulting on my own. And so I've done a lot of work with lots of different communities. So work in Chicago, state of Indiana, here in Philadelphia, and some of that has been evaluation planning. So some of that, so like a larger organizational evaluation planning for your, to go along with a strategic plan, but also just a evaluation design for specific projects, and theory of change work, and also more like sort of developmental evaluation for building a program, the program strategy. And one last thing. And also I've really get excited about doing work that is about civic engagement, or sort of arts-based civic engagement, and how we can build in good documentation practices for that, and sort of structure those so that like the knowledge and the lived experience that is gathered in that process actually filters up to policy making. So working on some projects in Santa Monica right now that are focused on that. So yeah, you can move to the next slide. So my superpower is actually about mapping complex social dynamics so that I can, so doing a theory of change, figuring out how your what you're doing, what that effect might actually have, even if it's when you're envisioning what your work, and helping you sort of like get clarity on that. But that's also sort of like, I see that as the core part of evaluation work that is actually about building your strategy and understanding and clarifying your strategy so that you understand the impact that is actually reasonable for the interventions that you're going to have, which is super complex when we're doing this place-based work. It's really hard sometimes to map that out, but that's something I'm like, have sort of some kind of knack for that. And so you can, next slide. So this means that I have, it's not just evaluation and research, but it's just all these ways of understanding their impact and how that might affect your strategy. So some of that is really focused on evaluation or data collection or building that kind of strategy, but some of it is really more about doing stakeholder analysis and figuring out how you need to actually engage your community, and how all of those things are actually part of, in some ways, a reflective or thoughtful practice. So, and that's me in a nutshell.
Susannah, I love your work. I want to talk at length for hours with you about this. But I'll ask one question. I'm really curious about, like, as you've seen in your work across the board, is there one, or what would be at the top of your list for one big change that grantees or grant makers could make in the evaluative process? We could be doing this better.
Oh my goodness. I think actually the first thing I tell everyone is actually just to take notes. Just take notes about your meetings, about like, so that you can have the kind of documentation to go back to and reflect on. I mean, I think that's, it's sort of, and I think it's something that I think particularly doing these more process-based kinds of interventions, all kinds of artistic research that is really generative, but we don't keep those learnings, right? Like, so the basic, sometimes the basic just saying like, oh, we should record this meeting so that we can, like, sometimes it's easier to talk it out, and that's, what we need. So that, and maybe actually, so yeah, maybe even before that is actually to create the time for reflection. So every step of the process. So I feel like it's less about these complicated, more technical processes and just about saying, yeah, we're going to, we did this thing and now we're all exhausted and don't want to think about it anymore, but we really should take at least 30 minutes together to talk about it, how it went, what we might do differently, and then and document that conversation, because you're going to forget. And then you'll have lost everything you learned by doing that thing. So that's my sort of like my hobby horse is definitely about documentation and actually just taking the time to reflect.
Yeah, I love that. Let the experience drive the evaluation, but also plan the evaluation all the way through on your project.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that advice. Well, I guess I can go next. So, hey, everybody, it's really good to meet you. I'm Jamie Horter. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an artist and a visual facilitator. I work in the realm of community engagement. I live on traditional Omaha homelands on a farm just outside of the town of Lyons, Nebraska. And I would say, as far as superpowers goes, one of them for me, I think would be curiosity. I'm a very curious person. And I think for me, that kind of broadens the possibilities that are available by staying curious, and also influences my work. I'm very multidisciplinary. And one of the things I really appreciate about artists is that artists are alchemists. By taking something that appears to be nothing and turning it into something wonderful and magnificent, there's some power and magic happening in there. And for me, one of the tools that I like to use to create some alchemy is just basic markers and paper. And through that work, I create visual meaning for groups. So a lot of the work that I do is actually pretty ephemeral or dematerialized. I really love working with elements of space and time. And I really consider our ways of being together as form itself. So every interaction that we have with somebody creates a world together. And therefore, I think it's really important to be intentional about our ways of being together whenever we step into a space, because there are these endless possibilities that exist in what could be created, what worlds we might create together, whether it's in just a moment of time or whether it's a long-term relationship. But the work that I do is very much a relational kind of art. So if you could go to the next slide, Melissa, I'll show you a few of some of the more materialized projects that I've done. And that includes the photos that are on the left is a project called Senior Spotlight. And this is something I co-created with a government teacher in my community. The examples are actually from the community of Green River, Utah. The idea is bringing senior students and senior citizens together. Those two groups are sometimes at the periphery of society and not necessarily involved or thought to be folks who can be change makers within their community. And so we put the spotlight on them, and senior students interact with the senior citizens and spend some time learning about each other's lives. And the youth write narratives about the seniors, and we work with them on learning photography, and they do portraits. And then these photos and narratives are placed in storefront windows in a downtown, in their downtown rural community. In the case of Green River, there are two primary languages spoken, Spanish and English. So we created narratives in both languages. And then in our community of Lyons and Decatur, which those two communities are part of the school district I'm involved in, we turned the first 4 years of those creations into a book. So that even throughout this time, some of the seniors have now passed on, but that cultural memory is still a part of the community. And on the right, down in the right-hand corner, at the bottom is an example from a project called Community Studio that I've been doing for about 10 years now. And this works with youth on basically creating a platform for them to go out into the community, out of the textbook, and work on their civics, but actually through an artistic, creative way. And students are granted a certain amount of hours over the course of the year, usually one class period a week, where they can design a project of their choice, so long as it benefits their community in some way. So in this example, there were students who remembered the days when they were young and in the park and there used to be ducks. And they wanted other people to experience that. So they said, why don't we bring ducks back to the park? So they created a duck habitat and had this temporary space and time for ducks to be back in the park. And fast forward, there's been so many projects, from creating a literary night at the library to food pantry to most recently, some students wanted to have a basketball court in their community. So they raised $40,000. They got donations of concrete and equipment, and they built a basketball court. So I'm really interested in how arts can be used to shape the social and political environment. The youth now look forward to this every year. The community is saying, wow, what are the youth going to be doing? And are recognizing them for the power that they do have as citizens to practice their citizenry and take some leadership. And then the other photos around thinking about ways in which we engage, because I think that the environment that we're in when we are in our own ways of being together is incredibly important in shaping how we interact and the things that happen when we interact. So that's an example of some of the ways that I enter into a space when I'm working with people and thinking about how does the environment shape how we're going to interact and how can we shape our environment. So if you could go to the next slide, Melissa. With that, I thought I'd share a few things that I might be able to offer you depending upon what you're doing for your project. So part of the work that I do in facilitating also includes training other people to facilitate a gathering or a meeting. So, or host a meeting. What does it look like to get set up? What do we need to do to create an agenda? How do we create good flow? What are the kinds of conversations that we're trying to have and what are the outcomes we want to achieve? Or what if we're co-creating with the group and we don't know what the outcomes are going to be? How do we set up an event for that to take place? So I'd love to help you with that. Or if you're looking for project management and timelines, help as you kind of track through things. If you like spreadsheets, I love to set up a good spreadsheet. Or if you like to do things a little bit more organically, there are processes that I use to work with people on their projects along the way in a different, kind of more organic shape. And coaching, by that I mean, instead of kind of providing advice or consultation, I really like to approach working with people by just asking questions and creating open space that helps you work through the questions that you have and discover your own answers. So if you want someone to be kind of that brainstorming partner, 2 brains are usually better than 1. And then on the community engagement end, if there's any work you're looking for on how to create things that are more accessible and the things to think about that sometimes get missed for whatever event you're doing, whether it or whatever part of your project involves that community engagement, whether it's something in person or if it's something online, we could talk about the best tools to use for that, what help you might need, how you can actually use art within that process so it transforms a meeting into something that is really engaged and co-created. And I'll also include working with youth in that and working in rural spaces. I'm based in rural and no 2 rural places are alike, but I do have a perspective of living in rural. So I'd be happy to toss around some ideas on any of these things, but I'd love to meet you and I will stop there.
So I also see why we went in order year before me. I have a kind of a light noted question for you. I also live on a farm, 81 acres, and I'm curious, how many cats do you have?
How many cats I have? I have 1 farm cat, but about 20 sheep. So maybe they make up for the just having the 1 cat.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here. Hello, everyone, meeting you virtually. And I'm excited to learn more about your projects and how I might be able to move them along. So who am I? I'm youngest of 3 biracial children, and so understanding my identity, and that was a really big part of my childhood, and it still is a big part of how I present myself today. So I grew up in the 1970s and the 80s, which is dating myself. So consider that the Sesame Street era, and that's where Kermit the Frog comes in. So as I was kind of navigating where I fit in, Kermit's "It's Not Easy Being Green" lyrics really struck a chord for me. And for those not familiar, Kermit is grappling with the advantages and disadvantages of having green skin. And so the song concludes on a high note, and he says, "I'm green and I'll do fine. It's beautiful and I think it's what I want to be." So this incidentally became the subject matter for my college entry essay. And as I moved forward as an adult, I focused on my strengths, unique qualities, and the content of my character, instead of what color my, what the color of my skin may or may not mean to others. So I would say that that is the core of who I am. So with the next slide. So on that note, if you ever want a reminder, I guess, of how cool you are and how unique you are, I highly recommend this book. So Clifton's Strengths Finder 2.0. It has a great quiz in there, or personality test, I guess I should say, and these are my top 5 strengths. So I guess these are my superpowers. So strategic. I'm good at evaluating a project, seeing all the angles, complexities, and potential roadblocks, then coming up with the most efficient action plan. Individualization, I hone in on each person's strengths and unique qualities to create productive teams with the right mix of personalities and skill sets. Achiever, every day is marked by a tangible accomplishment. So this is my driving force and set point for effective work groups. And then maximizer means that excellence, not average, is my measure, and I seek out and nurture this quality in others. And then finally, but not last, I am energized by the process of broadening my awareness. Knowledge is power. So that dovetails nicely into the next slide, which are my top tips for being a top-notch doing project management at best you can. So it really helps to be a visionary doer with a big picture perspective of the task at hand. So knowing all the steps that are necessary to get it accomplished, and then getting to know all aspects about your project is also key. So how do all the parts work together, including the stakeholders, vendors, consultants, and community, all their roles and important activities that they are doing. Being resourceful is crucial. I would say that's probably my number one tip. And also sincerely valuing and nurturing team members. And this also includes your frenemies, which are out there. And make sure you have thought through all the possible scenarios for a project, how it might go. So make sure you have a backup plan B, C, all the way through Z. And then last but not least, find a way out of negative thinking, and pretty quickly. So don't get stuck in the complaining sinkhole, as I'm calling it. So I wanted to share a couple examples of past work that I've done that shaped kind of who I am now and the work that I do now. So the next slide, let me give you a little history about my background. So I have an undergrad in art history and fine art with a master of architecture. After that, I spent 10 years in the advertising industry as a print producer and art buyer. I got burnt out, which that industry can do. But fortunately, I had a life reset courtesy of the 2008 Great Recession, which was wonderful. I'm facetious a little bit about that. But it reshaped my career trajectory into the work that I love doing today. So I went back to school. I got certificates in environmental horticulture, organic gardening and composting, permaculture and urban agriculture. And I was still in San Francisco at the time of this first project, which is Growing Home Community Garden. So it was a collaboration between the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association and the City of San Francisco's Project Homeless Connect program. The garden was 2 contiguous vacant lots, which was where the footings of the old freeway on and off ramps used to be before the Loma Prieta earthquake knocked them down. And so I helped design and install and manage an urban garden serving both the homeless and housed inhabitants of that area. So it was a really fun project. And then the next slide, I moved back to Indiana in 2011, and became the executive director of Manchester Main Street in North Manchester, Indiana. And I did that for 4 years. This was a chance to use all of my skill sets that I had accumulated up to that point. So art, architecture, landscape design, project management, community development. And North Manchester is a rural community, about 6,000 people. We did economic development, town beautification, town improvement projects, and clockwise from top left, I'll kind of go through a few of them. So we put local art in vacant storefronts. Next to the right of that, we had a holiday gala every year, which was our fundraiser, and it was a progressive dinner, and so it celebrated historic architecture and kind of what downtown was about. We installed a riverfront park with sculpture and signage that talked about the history of the Ill River and the inhabitants and the tribes that you called it home. We did a lot of murals around town. We had a fundraiser of engraved pavers, and we installed flower pots on the historic lamp posts downtown. We did an arts festival, that's bottom left. Historic preservation awards. We installed a community trail network, and we promoted North Manchester through a Discover Manchester campaign. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, some of the work that I did in the past, and somewhat what I do now. I would definitely encourage you to check out more information about me on the website, which is a lot more descriptive and concrete. And I look forward to working with you. So that's me.
So before Renee asks her question, I just want to let you all know that we have 2 more folks left. So it's Renee and Jason, and they're going to bring us home, and they're each going to do it in 4 minutes or less.
Oh my goodness. Does that include asking my question?
I'm afraid it does, Renee.
Okay, so I was gonna, all right, Renata, you're gonna get an easy question then, because I was gonna ask you about courage and pivoting. But I read about you online, and I learned that you like to fold origami in addition to all these other amazing things. And I'm wondering if you still practice that.
I don't. I wish I did. And it was interesting when I did it. I think I got through. I was trying to do every month. I bought one of those, every month or every day origami, and I was working in economic development at the time, and I think I got to April.
Oh, wow.
So, but I do enjoy it. I'd like to pick it up again.
That's
Thanks.
awesome. It was so fun to learn about you. Okay, 4 minutes. Can you go to my next slide? I'm going to go really fast. I really know how to do like one thing, which is public art. That's not completely true. And following 2 people who are really good at gardening, I'd like to say that I have a driveway that is also a garden, and I grow all of the produce I eat except for watermelon over the summer. But my work expertise, if you go to the next slide, is really in public art. And I'd say the heart of that expertise is I approach the field from many, many different points of view. I have worked for government. I have founded public art programs. I have been a public art planner and consultant. And I am also a visual artist. And so that image right there of the tumbleweed is the inner artist that all of us artists who work in arts administration bring with us all the time. And that is me, a picture of me cleaning out my office at the Office of Public Art on the last day before I kind of moved on to being a full-time consultant. Next image. My experience, I think my experience, as I just mentioned in the last slide, is from multiple points of view, how to make someone's public art dreams come true, right? And what I truly understand is that you have to do a lot of what that image is on the left, which is getting multiple people together to talk through plans and what everyone's expectations are, and edit what's going on to get what's on the right, which is the transformation of a abandoned liquor store in a downtown environment to the location where you place an international artwork that engages 200 people from your community. And so to get to that awesome, you have to sit through a lot of different meetings. And I have a lot of experience collaborating with non-arts professionals, helping them connect their area of expertise to what you need to do to make public art happen. Next image. And then my superpower is, I think that I can sit through all those meetings. And my superhero power is that I can create safe spaces where people who are not involved in the arts in an everyday capacity will take a risk to collaborate with an artist on an ambitious project. And I don't have time to tell you about what this is, but if you have a community that is filled with folks that are maybe a little bit nervous about doing a public art project, maybe we can work together on how to build a comfortable space for them to ask questions and open up their vulnerability and be willing to experiment. So next image. I would love to talk about, I love artist residencies in the public realm. So putting artists in non-arts environments to create work in collaboration with communities. I really nerd out about artist selection. I think that process needs to be good because it is a keystone for how projects move forward. How do you create an environment where artists, you know, in public art, it's so hard, but how can we create an environment where they can still make great work? Community participation in public art. How do you engage a community in design development and review so they feel comfortable giving artists feedback and artists feel comfortable receiving it? And budgets. How do you keep the cash flow going so artists can, you know, stay floating throughout a project and not get to kind of a budgetary pain point? Love to talk about any of that. I hope that was less than 4 minutes. Jason.
Perfect.
Ask me an easy question. Yeah, a yes or no question. That'll make it fast.
Can I not ask you one?
No, you can ask me.
So create a safe space, right? What I was gonna say is like how, what's one thing that we could do today to hope to be more flexible in developing the ability to have more conversations like you have?
Oh, I think, well, there's a lot of ways I can take that, but I'm going to go with my intuition. The first thing I thought of when you said that was acknowledge that public art does not last forever. And that if we want to stay flexible, we need to acknowledge the lifespan that projects have and that people are going to come after us and they're going to want to make their own public art. So we don't need to be like hogging the space for the future. And coming up with systems that allow future artists and communities to create meaningful works, I think is an act of generosity and flexibility.
Wow, the contradictions of the new and the old.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
That's a question.
Yeah, as we kind of dive into a project all around permanence for Black Los Angeles, right? My name is Jason Foster, President and CEO of Destination Crenshaw. I will be honest, I did not, follow the instructions on this presentation. So we're gonna kind of work through it, but it'll be quick. Next slide. I think, I actually threw a slide in that was talking about me. I will just talk through the pictures, right? I had one picture of my family in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was just kind of us all together. I had another picture of Stokely Carmichael in that word sweatshirt because I went to Howard. It's where I kind of experienced Black freedom for the first time at homecoming, and then now I want it everywhere. And then the third photo was of my kids. A lot of this project is really thinking about how we create generational change for them so they can, potentially have spatial justice, which is beauty, aesthetics, health, all these components together, including public art. And then the last photo is the artist formerly known of Looking at Himself from Kerry James Marshall. It was the first time I was ever actually affected by a piece of art. I'm a finance person by education. I was in Mocha in this incredibly affluent white environment staring at this image, this painting, looking at myself. It was wild. And I think for the first time was actually kind of struck. And that's what kind of led me to Destination Crenshaw and really searching for a way and an opportunity to work with art and with artists. Destination Crenshaw itself is a project that's right here, south of Leimert Park, north of Hyde Park in Los Angeles, in South Central. We just gave Nipsey his star on Monday. He named the project Destination Crenshaw because he's from the area and wanted, as we built a $2 billion light rail project, wanted the destination to actually be inward first, right? We claiming our community for permanent Black Los Angeles and having it be a destination for us. So, that's where we got our name. Next slide. And then, there was a community engagement effort led by the council member, Marquise Harris Dawson in Los Angeles. He led a years-long effort, really focusing on all the different elements that community could do together to really elevate a positive response to the shoreline being built. It is at grade, which was a pretty contentious decision to actually put that rail line at grade right in the middle of Crenshaw. It's the largest continuous Black ownership community west of the Mississippi. It's the largest Black business corridor with 43 Black businesses on the West Coast. All of these things still didn't make the train go underground. So think about how that happens. Next slide. But when you do community engagement, you elevate certain things. So what happened is artists are in the community and of the community. They start really having this conversation with us and really elevating how art can play a role. So that's kind of how we were able to elevate the curatorial committee, the public art curatorial committee, who's working from 2017 until now, meeting on a quarterly basis, thinking about all art elements, whether they be permanent art, monuments, installations, or temporary, hyper temporary banners, signage, everything and anything and everything in between. We kind of run it through this group. I make up excuses to have meetings with Dr. Joy. If you don't know her, she is amazing, and so are all the people on this committee. Next slide. So they kind of shepherd what we're calling, our art curatorial process. The presenter before me was talking about the process, how important it is. It is very important for us that we are focusing our efforts to engage artists grounded in the communities. That is our public pieces, like you see here by Charles Dixon. It's called Crenshaw Car Culture. It's deep in fabrication now. It'll be ready in April. Or others, our mini mural opportunities that are kind of marketing on our construction fences. We're working with a lot of digital artists in the area because we know that that's just one way to elevate the spirit and the feel of the community. And through this, we were actually able to kind of understand our logic around what actually an art commission is for Destination Crenshaw. But ultimately, it's to create what we're calling DC Art Core, which is a programming initiative to actually do 2D mural opportunities along Crenshaw Boulevard. So there's 85 other opportunities. Once we're done, we'll have over 100, which would be the largest Black public arts project in the country. And we're looking to access California's % or 0.5% for the arts allocation that is attached to public infrastructure dollars. So right now we have a $30 billion public infrastructure pipeline. 0.5% or 1%, there's some art money there, and we got to make sure that it drives to the community. Next slide. And this is a streetscape for a project. We're also building, right? So we're building 2.6 miles of streetscape sidewalks. This is what happens when artists are engaged in your design process. What you see in the shade structures is actually a motif of the North African star grass or Bermuda grass. This grass was bedding of slave ships and actually came to this country and migrated into all 50 states because of that voyage. we are actually using that motif throughout our projects, whether it be the shade structures or the slants in the pavement, showing the migration of Black people in this country, so that this community knows that this development is for them and no one else, right? And we're addressing cultural erasure and really addressing the change in our community, hopefully driving it forward for the people that live here. Artists do that. Next slide. And then ultimately creating a 1.3 mile total experience, right? We'll have thematic nodes throughout the corridor. You see improvisations first, dreams, and togetherness. We'll have banners and signage. We'll have exhibition opportunities throughout with public programming as how we facilitate the community's access. And we'll also have narratives that'll be up and down the corridor. People will be able to experience what it is to be in Crenshaw as the 6 million new people arrive every year on the train, an estimate. So, I think what I can provide is, macro level change, right? Dealing with infrastructure, dealing with kind of capital markets, when the real estate market is interested in you now, right? How you can actually benefit that through value capture and actually drive that towards artists and drive that towards creative industries. We are analyzing the creative economy in Crenshaw to understand our economic impact, to actually put that with our traditional economic impacts created by the city so that we can advocate to our full number and our full value, because we know that Black creative capital is the chief export of not only Los Angeles, but the world.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm gonna call on Scott to ask you one question.
Hello. So, I realize this kind of made me feel like we're on a dating show.
That's funny because I've already emailed Scott, like we're gonna meet soon.
Yeah. Hello, Jason. So my question is, when Destination Crenshaw is completed, how will you personally celebrate?
I will take a nap.
Yes.
I don't know if everyone on this call knows about these things called float lab, but they're sensory deprivation chambers. You get in them and you don't have any sight, hearing, sense of gravity. I will go in there for as long as they will leave. And then I will not leave until they kick me out. That's what I'm gonna do when I'm done.
Great. Thanks to everyone on the call today, the resource team members, and to all of you, the grantees and partners. The only question we really had was how do I sign up for a consult? And so you will see the link in the chat for that. And if you'd like to meet more resource team members, please join our September 14th office hours. More on that to come in our e-blast. You can sign up for that too. Thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.